It's been over 4 years since I have recommended that people purchase a MacBook Pro, mostly because it's been 4 years since Apple has made a good MacBook Pro. You see, the Touch Bar generation of MacBook Pro that began in late 2016 has been, well, it's been controversial to say the least, and not necessarily for the reasons you might expect, like moving to a smaller battery and introducing severe thermal limitations in pursuit of unnecessary thinness, or perhaps by ditching ubiquitous ports in favor of 4 Type-C connectors that require most of us to carry around a swath of dongles, or the huge increase in price thanks to the required but largely unnecessary Touch Bar. Now, look, these things were annoying, but they weren't deal breakers, at least not to those of us who wanted macOS. The deal breakers became more apparent and troublesome as these newfangled notebooks spent time in the field. Reliability became an unknown concept to Apple, with display cable issues, battery swelling, and the butterfly keyboard. Oh, the butterfly keyboard. I had 2 separate MacBook Pro models repaired over the last couple years, and I know many people who had more visits to the Genius Bar for the same machine than they could count on one hand. Earlier this year, Apple, well, they announced the 15-inch i9 MacBook Pro, and on the day of its release, added it to the 4-year keyboard service program, which was created to avoid forcible mass recalls. These problems have damaged Apple's reputation as a laptop maker, and good, they should have. So when your eyes see the new 16-inch MacBook Pro, a laptop that seems nearly identical to the 15.4-inch laptop it replaces, you'd be forgiven for thinking that nothing has changed. But it has. This Apple laptop is fantastic, and that's the first time I've been able to say that since 2015. This video is sponsored by RAVPower's mini external SSD. Its small size, zinc alloy build quality, and high USB 3.1 Gen 2 capabilities make it a killer option for the price. Get one with the link below and use my code to save $20. The name change might make you think that the display is the biggest upgrade. And it would make sense to think that, but the screens are actually nearly identical. The display does gain an extra 0.6 inches diagonally, and the bezels that border the screen shrink just a tiny bit, but not as much as I thought they would because the footprint of the laptop's chassis increases in all directions, albeit slightly. The screen, while very good, remains essentially unchanged from the 2016 MacBook Pro and later. 500 nit brightness, DCI-P3 color, and True Tone sensors. Interestingly, you can now manually specify the display's refresh rate, although it still tops out at around 60 Hz, which is a nice feature for pro content creators. But sadly, the OS defaults to a non-perfect scaling ratio with anti-aliasing, so text and UI elements can look a little bit blurry, which drives me nuts. Moving up one size in the scaler in System Preferences uses a perfect 2:1 ratio, and so the text is super sharp, but the UI elements suddenly become just a little bit larger than I prefer. This is a real tiny thing, not a deal breaker, but Apple really should be putting in a higher resolution display into these laptops to maintain pixel perfect scaling at the default setting. Save for the keyboard, the chassis remains largely unchanged, with the same enormous haptic trackpad, headphone jack, 4 Thunderbolt 3 Type-C ports, and really not much else. And many pros have bemoaned the absence of an SD card slot, and unfortunately, it doesn't make its return here either. The thing is probably gone for good. So let's talk about that keyboard. It's old, and yet it's new again. Gone are the butterfly switches with non-removable keycaps, and hello is our returning scissor switch that has been used by Apple since, well, basically the 1999 iBook G3. But to say that the new keyboard is the same as the pre-butterfly keyboard, as many people have reported, is a bit disingenuous in my opinion, because there appear to be a number of really solid improvements over the last scissor switch keyboard we saw in the 2015 MacBook Pro. Some things learned by Apple with the butterfly key switches. For starters, key stability is much improved, and you can register a key press basically by pushing anywhere on the keycap, which is really nice. Travel distance is a massive improvement from the butterfly keyboard, but has inherited the more tactile bump present in the butterfly key switches, which makes it feel a bit more mechanical-like, a bit more bumpy, and less mushy than the 2015 and prior MacBook Pro models. The horrid arrow keys from the prior model have been axed, and the inverted T arrow cluster has made a return, which makes touch typists like me super happy, because the arrow keys are distinctly different than every other key. The touch bar above the keyboard is sadly still required. I really wish Apple would offer a SKU without it, even at the same price, because I am just not a touch bar fan. But my biggest complaint about it has been fixed. Apple has finally brought back the physical escape key. No more pinky slapping that glass. Nice. The Touch ID sensor, flanking the other side of the touch bar, has also been separated, and it has been given a smooth matte finish to match the rest of the keys. It's a super unnecessary and super Apple thing to do, but I'm glad to get to say goodbye to the glossy, goober-smeared fingerprint reader of yore. This keyboard is objectively less beautiful than the one it replaces, but it finally, at least in some ways, seems that Apple is prioritizing function over form. It feels so much better, and if reliability is at the same level as the pre-Butterfly MacBook Pros, this will be the best keyboard that Apple has ever put in a laptop, bar none. Under the covers, there are a number of small but nice improvements. The speakers are way better than the early 2019 15-inch MacBook Pro, which already had some of the best speakers of any laptop. Bass is surprisingly full, and the dynamic range is shockingly good, with volumes able to fill a small to medium-sized room. Now, they're not going to be used for monitoring or any serious usage. I mean, they're hardly pro, but they're also not total garbage, which is nice for the occasional YouTube video or podcast. Here's a quick sample. So good, but still bad. I mean, they're still laptop speakers. The microphone array used, to quote Apple, has 3 studio-quality microphones with high signal-to-noise ratio. Again, not super amazing or anything, but more than passable when you're in a bit of a pinch, and pretty nice for a laptop. The 720p webcam quality remains shockingly mediocre, which is a bit of a shame for those of us that use Skype or FaceTime with frequency, a weird omission for a laptop with such fantastic microphones. Battery capacity took a big dip in the past few years. The 2015 MacBook Pro sported a 99.5 watt-hour cell, and the 2016 MacBook Pro shrunk that by nearly 20% to 83.3 watt-hours. The 16-inch MacBook Pro makes amends by returning to a 99.8 watt-hour capacity, which is a mere 0.2 watt-hours away from the FAA's limit for carry-on baggage, and excellent battery life it achieves. Now look, you're still going to crush it when you're doing extremely intensive work, but you'll get 10 to 11 hours easy with pretty high screen brightness when doing normal day-to-day tasks. A huge improvement. Okay, let's get to performance, because these laptops are still running 9th gen Intel Coffee Lake CPUs, which already made their way into the early 2019 i9 15-inch MacBook Pro, which I reviewed here. Come on. There we go. It would be reasonable to presume then that the new 16-inch MacBook Pros perform identically to the laptops they replace, but you'd be wrong. Because despite using the same CPU, Apple finally seems to have addressed something that I have been harping on for years, and that's thermal performance. Now, while throttling was fixed earlier this year with the updated 15-inch MacBook Pro release, the thermal constraints of the system would really only allow for about 30 to 45 seconds of sustained turbo boosting before the processor would settle down to within 100 megahertz of its base clock speed. So was it thermally throttled? Technically no, but thermally constrained? Absolutely. This year's design makes a number of improvements to the cooling assembly. The heat pipes and heat sink have increased by about 35% in size, and have gone from being absolutely tiny to merely super tiny. But that's not the only improvement. The dual fan design has also increased the size of the impeller blades, which Apple claims can push an additional 28% more air through those larger radiators. And I also found beefier exhaust holes than the 15-inch 2019 model, which presumably allows the computer to push more air out more quietly, which it does. This laptop gets loud, but not anywhere near as loud as the 15-inch MacBook Pro. These small improvements may not sound like much, but Apple claims an additional 12 watts of heat dissipation compared to the prior 15-inch model, and that seems to hold true. My 15-inch model is the 2.4 gigahertz i9 spec, and the 16-inch model is the 2.3 gigahertz i9 spec. So in Geekbench and other quick tests, well, my higher spec 15-inch model unsurprisingly takes the crown. However, in anything with a sustained load, the new 16-inch MacBook Pro takes the crown easily. not just in synthetic benchmarks like Cinebench, but also in 4K video exports using Final Cut Pro, Adobe Premiere Pro, and even an Xcode app compile test. Time and time again, the 16-inch MacBook Pro shows itself as the clear leader. When using Intel Power Gadget under 100% utilization and max power draw during a Premiere Pro render session, the fans will ramp up immediately, which is a huge departure from the laggy fans that have been present in years past. And much to my surprise, the machine maintains a boost clock of about 2.89 gigahertz during a 25-minute export in a 70-degree Fahrenheit ambient temperature room. This is over 600 megahertz higher than the rated base clock speed. And not once in any test, even when both the CPU and GPU were under full load, did I even come close to the base clock speed. This didn't require any manual fan control or user intervention. Could Apple have gotten better thermals and a thicker laptop with larger fans? Well, absolutely. But the current form factor no longer feels like a huge compromise, and performance is quite excellent for a device of this size and weight. Superb work on thermals, Apple. I can't believe those are words that just came out of my mouth. Oh, pro tip, don't pay an extra $200 to upgrade the CPU. Spend it on RAM and GPU upgrades instead. Speaking of the GPU, the Vega cards from prior generations have been ditched in favor of a new Radeon Pro 5500M using AMD's Navi architecture. These improvements are actually quite massive, with a 30% average increase in performance on both Metal Compute as well as OpenCL gaming. Nice. One last stray thought. Apple didn't add Wi-Fi 6 into the new MacBook Pros, which was a surprise to many given that they've added it to basically every other product they've launched this year. But you see, it didn't surprise me at all. The 10th gen Intel processors coming early next year come with Wi-Fi 6 support built in. And they also moved down to a 10 nanometer process, which Intel's been working on for way too long, which should, theoretically, mean much better performance in the same thermal package as well. So I'm estimating that Apple updates the 13-inch MacBook Pro and the 16-inch MacBook Pro again in the next 6 to 9 months, and that the improvements will be another surprisingly large jump. The first iteration of 16-inch MacBook Pro isn't a revolutionary leap by any stretch, and most people probably won't even be able to visually distinguish the difference between this and the 15-inch MacBook Pro that it replaces. But make no mistake, this is not the same laptop. It's actually good, and Apple hasn't had a good laptop in years. So you better believe it's a welcome change. Nice work, Apple. Now hurry up and fix that abominable 13-inch MacBook Pro you still have in your lineup. You don't get any congratulations from me yet. But you, dear viewer, will receive my congratulations upon purchasing a product from today's sponsor, RavPower. This tiny little SSD is barely larger than a stick of gum, and it makes the already very small Samsung T5 look enormous by comparison. It comes in a beautiful zinc alloy case that's rugged enough to stand up to, well, your everyday beating, and with a JMS 580 USB 3.1 Gen 2 capable chipset, it has average read-write rates of 480 and 520 megabytes per second, respectively. It's ready to work with just about any file format you can throw at it, and with high speeds, it makes it a great option for on-the-go content creators. It's supported, obviously, by both macOS and Windows, but also Android and even the iPad Pro. It comes in 512 gigabyte and 1 terabyte capacities, and it's so cute and tiny and wonderful you gotta buy one, especially at this price, and especially with $20 off, which viewers of Snazzy Labs can get by using my link below and my coupon code. Well, folks, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you didn't, that other button seems to work okay too. Get subscribed for more awesome tech videos like these, but most importantly, and as always, stay snazzy. See you later, folks.